Has anyone here ever played a classic SEGA game?
Yeah.
All right, so we got to do something to get this panel started off right. Okay? What happens when you turn on a Genesis game? There we go.
Well, that was a little weak, but
Yeah,
you guys get the point.
Yeah. So
but we can
everyone
do this
knows
better.
it.
Yep.
So let's do it on 3, 2, 1.
SEGA! All right, here we go.
That's awesome. So welcome everyone to the SEGA Perspective, bringing Japanese games to the West. This is a discussion on localization and bringing games from Japan to our market. A lot of interesting stuff going on. I'm not going to talk too much. My name's John. I work with SEGA of America and Atlas USA. And here we have our other lovely panelists.
Hey guys, so yeah, we'll just get started. So first of all, I wanted to start by saying that I'm humbled that so many people would come listen to SEGA, listen to us talk about something as mundane, seemingly mundane as localization, but I promise we have a lot of interesting stuff to talk about today, and we hope you enjoy our presentation, all the stuff we're going to be sharing with you. My name is Sam Mullen. I'm the Director of Production over down in the Irvine office. We have kind of two SEGA of America offices. One's in Burbank that focuses on Sonic the Hedgehog, and one down in Irvine that focuses on sort of Japanese content in general. And so I run the production and localization department down there, and it's a pleasure to meet you all today.
I'm Andrew Davis. I'm a localization producer on Valkyria Chronicles 4. I've been in the industry for about 20, I don't know, half my life, but yeah, I know.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, I started in like, even in college, like fan translations and freeware stuff, and then got hired at a Bandai Namco like several years ago and did a bunch of stuff there, worked on localization producing, editing. There was an editing team. So yeah, I'm here at SEGA and it's great.
Cool. I'm Sarah. I'm one of our PR managers in our brand new European office. I've been in the industry for half your lifetime. Sorry.
Yeah.
So I've been working on RPGs for about 10 years, but mostly in community. So it's really exciting for me to be part of the incredible community that SEGA has fostered here. Yeah. And that is in this room, so thank you.
Yeah, I just to circle back, I got so humbled by all you guys like up here. I forgot to actually kind of give you my background. So I've been working with SEGA for basically 8.5 years now, almost 9 years now. And prior to that, I actually worked at Atlas before we kind of like started combining our powers to wreak havoc on the Japanese localization world. But I've worked on a ton of SEGA games. I've had my fingers in Yakuza stuff. I was one of the people who helped bring Project Diva to the West. I love SEGA stuff, and I love bringing content out of Japan. So let's get going. So let's talk about what we actually do. So like I hinted at earlier, SEGA is actually a really big corporation, and we have a lot of different offices and different functions, and it's all spread all over the world. Like for example, we have like our European offices, which are very big into the PC side of things. They work on properties like
2 Point Hospital,
Football Manager, all that kind of stuff. And recently they've just released a 2 Point Hospital. They do all kinds of amazing work over there. But in our office specifically, what we do in our Irvine office is bring the content that our Japanese colleagues are building in Japan and bringing it to West. And now it's not just SEGA content, but we also work on Atlas content, of course. We also work on third-party stuff as well, which is some of the smaller niche titles and whatnot. And we build out a roadmap based on like the opportunities we feel are going to work well in this audience, and that's kind of what we've built our entire business around. We also have been recently refocusing our efforts on the European side and trying to bring more languages and giving more access not only to the North American stuff, but Europe as well, because that's the other half of the world. And the most recent stuff that we've been working on this year is mainly these 4 games you're seeing on the screen here: Yakuza Kiwami 2, Valkyria Chronicles 4, Lost Paradise, and Shining Resonance. So, with no further ado, let's talk about localization and what localization means and why localization, Japanese to English localization, is interesting and worth your consideration. So localization is a really interesting space. It's not, people who aren't familiar with the localization space think it's just making, essentially telling people what they originally said in Japanese. But really, what localization is so much more than that. It's about building an emotion. It's about trying to have our users react the same way to the original content, the Japanese content, as you would, even though you don't speak Japanese. And that you can't really do that when you just translate. I guarantee you that this original Japanese text had nothing to do with peacocks. But you all laughed when you read it, and you all enjoyed that, and that elicited a response. And that's localization kind of doing its best work. Another good one that we love, because as you guys probably, how many Yakuza fans do we have in the audience? I'm sure we have a lot. Right? Yeah. If you're not a Yakuza fan, I would love to find out why. Because that's a really interesting kind of topic, actually, for us, because we think Yakuza is amazing. Another interesting kind of topic on this is this really famous thing that has popped up when it comes to puns and jokes in Japanese. So there's this actually, in Yakuza 0, there's this really kind of throwaway line in one of the dialogue scenes where Majima actually says something to the effect, in Japanese he says this phrase, which you read as futon ga futonda. And what this means in Japanese, it's a pun. Literally in English it means the futon blew away. But that means nothing in English, because it's a play on words on the fact that futon and futonda sound similar, so it's humorous. So what do we do?
It's really dumb, but it's humorous.
It's really dumb. It's kind of like chicken cross the road kind of level, like, we just threw something funny in. But we, in the English translation, we actually were able to evolve it into this particular really famous scene where Majima is in the cult, and he throws in this thing where he says, "Want to avoid dangerous cults? Just practice safe sex."
I'm so glad I got to hear you say that.
So this has become a really, really famous line, and it's another example of like the value, the stuff that we bring in localization, and we really try to connect you with the characters and making sure that you're having fun, because that's ultimately the goal here. Is when you play video games, you want to have fun, you want to feel something, you want to have an emotional response. Interesting aside, this actual same joke comes up in Kiwami 2. Apparently, Kiwami 2. According to the producer, has more puns in it than any other Yakuza game he's ever worked on. And it's really, really thick with that. And this same joke pops up in one of the girlfriend kind of the dating scenes. And if you're playing the game, you come across that, you'll notice that since we wanted to connect it back to this particular scene, we actually use the same safe sex joke in that situation, which you'll notice that it doesn't really fit perfectly in that specific dialogue. And that's sort of a thing we call the localization butterfly effect, where if you do something really smart one, it may come back to bite you later because it doesn't really fit. So that's an interesting kind of thing that goes on in sort of like the sort of challenges that we work on. Another thing I kind of also want to talk about is like how much work goes into actual localization. So up here we have these are like all the Yakuza games that I've ever worked on, so I'm particularly knowledgeable about like how much work is involved in these. Yakuza 5 has 2.3 million Japanese characters. That's maybe just a number to you guys, but that's a lot of text. It's a couple Bibles, probably like 3 or 4 Bibles worth of text that has to be translated to make this. And that's because, for people who have played Yakuza 5, who here has played Yakuza 5? Who here plays Yakuza 0?
Yes.
Who here played Yakuza Kiwami 1? Who here played Yakuza 6? Okay, yeah, that makes sense. But not a lot of people play. Because everyone plays.
No.
Right. Well, because everyone starts in at the Yakuza 0, because that's the easiest one to access, and then they're huge games. They take a long time. They take a long time to translate. So, basically, when it comes to text translation, we typically expect someone to like a normal human being, a normal human translator can translate maybe like. How many JPs? Maybe like 3,000?
3,000, 4,000 a day.
3,000, 4,000 a day. So you can get your calculator out and try to figure out like how much it would take a single person to translate 2.3 million JPCs, Japanese characters, that's how we say. And you'll notice that these are not small undertakings, and they take time, and they take a lot of time to do. So these are these games, but we also most recently worked on your project.
Yep. Yeah, Valkyria Chronicles 4. As you can see, it's a little smaller than a typical Yakuza game in terms of translation work, but that actually freed us up to essentially like then expand our options for how we were going to localize it. That's why we have, for instance, English, French, Italian, German, Spanish subtitles, because it was a different style of game. It's you know, the Yakuza series are in this sort of expansive world that you meander around and do various mini games and subquests. The Valkyria Chronicles series is a little more focused as you're going through the book mode, through the cutscenes, and so the game itself was like, just because we were able to manage the like EFIG's localization, the various European languages, that gave us the chance to try to expand the audience and get more people into it.
I think even translating for the website and all our different territories, we came in at 100,000 words that were translated just for website social assets just across Europe.
It's not just the game.
Crazy.
There's like a lot of other stuff. As soon as you add another language to the game, you know, you've got to get all the assets. Oh man.
Yeah, the web manual.
Guys, manuals are such a knockdown drag out. It's like all this technical text and. Okay, here's another poll. How many of you guys actually read the manuals that were actually implemented into the game?
I love you all.
Yeah, sometimes the manual actually is a little bit more work than the actual game translation itself.
And every image in the manual, they have to take 5 different sets of screenshots so that it'll match up with the language.
Yeah. So, you know, translation is not just the game. It's not. There's a whole bunch of other stuff in it. And then, of course, you know, for Valkyria Chronicles specifically, we have the 2 language tracks. You can play it in Japanese voice or English voice. Yep. And that has its own kind of set of challenges and whatnot with it as well. But when it comes to the publishing process, localization is just a step. Like, bringing these games out into the West is actually has a whole bunch of different kind of hurdles and whatnot we have to go through. It's not just, you know, type translation text into cell B1, save, and
ta-da, it's in the game.
Now we have a game. You can play it, and it's out on. You know, there's a whole kind of steps and process that we go into. So first of all, I mean, like, you know, first we have to acquire these games. There's a lot of discussion that goes along that, and setting up terms and whatnot. Then we translate it, and within the sort of the process that we employ currently within SEGA and Atlas. The way we typically do this is it's this two-stage process. We have translators, and our translators are like fully bilingual people. They speak Japanese, they speak English, they can read the Japanese and fully understand it. They can communicate that to a person who doesn't speak Japanese clearly, with all the context, losing nothing. Because sometimes if you just raw translate something into English and you're not careful about it, you may lose some of the context, lose some of the nuance if you don't kind of over-explain what the person is trying to say. But when you go to over-explain things, then it starts to sound unnatural in English itself, because no one would say that way, but you have to kind of get that all across. And that's what our translation teams do up front. But then we have editors, and Andrew, you're a pretty experienced editor yourself. Usually, Andrew's a little bit of an exception. Usually, our editors are monolingual; they only speak English. The weird thing about being both, I'm bilingual. I can speak Japanese. Andrew can speak Japanese. You speak a couple languages too, don't you?
I speak Chinese, which is like Japanese, but not at all.
Totally different.
Yeah, so that's not helpful.
But one of the things, if you're a multilingual speaker, what you'll find is that your other languages sort of pollute your base language, and you start to allow. You give passes on stuff that's not natural. You're like, oh yeah, okay, I can see.
Oh yeah, well, he said it can't be helped. Oh well, that's a natural. Yeah. It's oh wait, no, that's.
Yeah. You guys know it can't be helped. So there's this famous, there's this very standard kind of way of saying things in Japanese. You say things like you say shoganai, which is just like.
It is what it is.
It's kind of is what it is. It is what it is. But it literally means it can't be helped. So every time but people often translate it just flat, and it's become sort of a joke within sort of Japanese to English translation community, oh, it can't be helped. And it's like, it can't be helped that you can't, you end up using the word, it can't be helped.
Yeah, you can help that, actually.
but it requires you to kind of get in and wrangle that. If you're the translator, you may feel like, well, that's what he said in Japanese, so I'm just going to put it there. But if you have these monolingual people who like identify when English doesn't sound right. They come through this translated text and they fix it. And that's often where we get a lot of the spice, and they kind of add some flair to it.
And also just the way it reads, because like as a translator, sometimes I look at it, I'm like, well, I want to make sure that I account for this clause in the Japanese and wedge that in there, and I moved it all around, and okay, well that 100% is the entire Japanese, but then the editor can look at it and be like, that's a very wobbly sentence.
Yeah, this sounds like it was written by like a middle schooler trying to like sound smart or something like that. So
not to cut things short, but this is a very complex process, obviously, and I think showing examples may be the perfect way for people to see how this works.
So we're gonna get to some examples and maybe a little bit later in. So I will move this forward there. So I'm gonna let Andrew talk about his project for a little bit.
Sure. So this is an example of. So I mean, as you know, games change, during development sometimes. And so, for instance, like this person, this little sort of sad man on the left here is named Lent Uries, and I've listed up a few of his important bullet points. Like he could use a haircut, and he's kind of a military history nerd, and it looks really sad. And then on the right is where the actual protagonist, or the final protagonist of Valkyria Chronicles 4 wound up. They changed his name to Claude Wallace.
Gave him a haircut.
Yeah, he got a different haircut. He's got a different personality. And when we asked the developer about this, they said, oh yeah, he was, because the theme of the game started to coalesce around the will to accomplish the mission, then the idea of having sort of a sad sack, kind of weak main character didn't quite gel with what we were going for, so we kind of reinvented the whole main character. And the thing is, like when you're doing localization, you are working on something or if the game isn't out already in Japan, if it isn't like mastered up in Japan, then you could be working on something that's like a living organism that will it'll like change and twist around in ways underneath you, even as you're like working on the text. And so I know everyone likes to have, I like to have like games that come out with, worldwide with like 12, 15 different languages, but that can be really hard, especially when the base language is Japanese, and then we have to, if we're going to other languages, we usually have to go from Japanese to English, and then from English into other languages. So that can be a challenge when we're trying to like organize like what our schedule is going to be for getting a title localized.
Yeah.
So does that mean for you that text can change completely? So like Lent's dialogue can be different to Claude, and then you have to retranslate a whole swathe of your text?
We didn't actually, fortunately, by the time we actually did start localization on this title, Lent had sort of vanished into the ether, and so when you see when you're playing the game, just say a little prayer for Lent, who sacrificed himself for the good for all of Europa.
God bless you, Lent.
Yes.
So let's give some examples, or let's show kind of like A/B, because you don't often get the A/B kind of what dialogue, the touch and feel of dialogue. So we're going to show you a little bit of what the Japanese dialogue looks like and how that sounds in Japanese, and then we're going to show you what it looks like in English and sounds like in English.
頼む麻酔を
麻酔は有限この程度の縫合で使えませんすぐ終わりますから我慢して
Okay, so this is that same thing, and what you'll notice is that it does sound different, but we still also are going to be like leaning on the cues that the Japanese has like laid before us. We're going to try to kind of match that as well as we can.
Please, Doc, give me the drugs.
We only have so much anesthetic to go around. Can't waste it on stitches. You'll just have to grit your teeth.
So that's a kind of an example of like when you A/B, I mean, where we try to stay as close to the source as possible, but sometimes we do have to kind of like the voice tone changes, or this kind of stuff.
Oh yeah, and the nuance can always, like the voice tone, just the way it reads. The whole read of a scene can change sometimes, and sometimes for the better, and sometimes we don't quite get something that was in the Japanese, but yeah.
Yeah, and recording for voice is really difficult too, because when you record for voice, like it has to be something a person would actually say. You can actually fake a lot of things in text, because people in text, you can write a bunch of stuff that no one would ever say it that way. But as soon as you try to speak it out loud, you're like, God, this is a really awkward sentence that only comes out when you actually try to say it. And so we actually have to like simplify the language for VO. And VO actually creates a lot of complexity in localization that we have to always kind of constantly wrangle with. So UI is its own, in Japanese localization, is its own kind of beast as well. So one of the challenging things about Valkyria Chronicles 2 is you guys had a lot of what we call 2D text.
Probably 4, Valkyria Chronicles 4.
What did I say?
You said 2.
Said 2.
Oh, 2. Valkyria Chronicles 4.
It's 2 on the consoles.
It is 2
the second one on the consoles.
Second one on the consoles. So there's a lot of stuff what we call 2D text.
Yeah. Yeah, it's 2D text or graphical text, and that stuff is actually handcrafted by an artist on the Japanese team. And so if you decide, oh, well, actually there's a bug in the English and that propagated to the French, Italian, German, Spanish, and then you go and report that back to the dev team. Now they have to rebuild and draw like 5 new art assets and put them in the game and test them to make sure that they're aligned and not broken. Yeah. And that's like compared to like what we call the, I don't know, what do we call it? The non-graphic text.
I think the word is system text.
Yeah,
system that's text. The Japanese word.
Yeah, basically stuff that you can, it's just like it's text data, and you can just sort of throw it at the program and it'll just display it. Yeah. And so that's a lot easier to work with, but stuff like this graphical text has to be handcrafted, and so that's one reason that we have to nail it down as early as possible, because it's a lot harder to change it during debug. Yeah, I mean sometimes we have to do with issues. You'll see on the top left here, there's the word there that's like representing crouching. So if that was system text, the size of the characters would be kind of locked. And if we tried to write crouching in there, it would just like fly out of that space. So we'd have to come up with some kind of we just have to say crouch or. I mean, we were able to squeeze it in with this one, and it's still legible. But sometimes, Japanese UI designers, because they have kanji, which are great. Kanji are so compact. They're like like a little square that communicates like an entire concept. So you can see like menus in Japanese games, and it's like, okay, well there's 2 ideographs. There's 2 like kanji on each entry of this menu, and there's no room for anything beyond 2 characters. And yeah, it's a challenge. Yeah. So I mean, part of the way Sega and Atlas and the way we approach our localization is we try to make sure that all these things are being treated as cleanly as possible, and not trying to not take any shortcuts. Reaching out to devs, making guys, can you like give us more space? Can you stretch this screen a little bit more? We really don't want to have to use an abbreviation. We hate abbreviations. And even like as you notice on the left side, it says things like change and bullet. People don't realize that a lot of Japanese games have a lot of English words, or at least words that make sense to Japanese people. And so one of the things we have to do is go through that and see like, okay, is this acceptable, or do we want to like for in our market it made sense to go change bullet to ammo, because that just sounds more natural. So other things we do in localization are things like this. So for some of you may not be aware of it, but the package art in Japan is slightly different than we have it over here in the West. And when it comes to selling these games, we really want people to kind of like want the imagery and all the marketing assets to resonate with our audience. And again, it's all about emotional response and like initial kind of instinctive reactions and that kind of thing. And so for Valkyria Chronicles, where we look at this game, for us, it's like it's a tale of what, like overcoming adversity and grit in the face of danger, and like this sort of steadfastness and whatnot. And those are our themes, and that's what marketing kind of comes up with these like things that they want to communicate to to you guys, that what this game is about. And we look at, we go, is the Japanese art really nailing that? And we open up a discussion with the dev team, and we're like, hey guys, these are the themes we want to hit. Here are the color schemes that we think will work well communicating this. What do you guys think? And there's like this deep conversation that has, and the dev team will eventually say, well, how about this? And they'll go through a whole bunch of different kind of patterns. And a long story short, so you'll see these subtle differences in palette changes. And
that goes like behind the scenes. It's not very glamorous, but you've got feedback coming from all across Europe: Germany, France, Italy, Spain, who all have different sensitivities. Even for this cover example, having a tank on the front meant we had to go through a slightly longer process in Germany because they're a little bit more sensitive. Yep. And it means that we get covers that we can sell the game globally without anyone being put off by anything, but still getting across those key beats that we mentioned. Yeah. Yeah. And so Sega has a lot of games coming out this year specifically. A lot of different IPs. So I think
Sam, you can take it
Yeah,
away.
so I want to kind of jump gears a little bit from Valkyria. Let's go back to Yakuza a little bit. So there's a couple of like interesting like tidbits I want you guys to like share with you about some of the things we've been working on in other games. So for Kiwami 2, so for Kiwami 1, we actually retranslated that entire game from scratch, like with our team. There's a couple reasons we did that. One was to like teach people how to really translate Yakuza games, and we needed to kind of like go through that exercise. But for Yakuza Kiwami 2, we actually had all the original text, and we basically had some translators go through and like point out parts of the game that lost some of the meaning or like misunderstood what was actually happening. We did a fresh paint on it, but there were some gems in that game that we were like, we can't touch, this is too good. So so you'll find a lot of like really interesting like link-ups between the two works where it doesn't feel like it's a complete rework of the whole thing, and we kept what we thought was really going to work for that. But there's other things that we did actually change. Kaori, the female protagonist in this particular title, she has a really interesting kind of way of speaking in Japanese. She switches between the Kansai dialect and the Tokyo dialect depending on who she's talking to and how comfortable she feels. Like her Kansai dialect is her like raw mode, like she's open or she's angry, and her Tokyo style is when she's kind of a little bit more put together. So if you're playing this game and you find that her subtitles seem like it's two different types of people talking, it's because in the Japanese she's code switching between the two different styles depending on who she's actually speaking to. Before we move on from Kiwami 2, I actually have a special message from the producer, Scott Stricart. If you've ever watched, he and I would do these streams. You can go on the Sega channel and check them out, where we dive into like Yakuza and the localization of that title a bit. But he has a specific ask he told me to talk to you guys about. Is like, if you have this game you're playing, he really wants you guys to finish the clan creator. Apparently there's this final scene where all the people kind of gather around the table and they're talking about essentially the ABCs of love, which is translated in Japanese as the 5 flirtations of Sashi Susei. So one of the things we really strive to in the Yakuza games is to link what you're hearing and what you're reading. And so we didn't just write past this. We didn't say the ABCs of love. He actually kind of owned it up and made it work. I watched this scene this morning in Japanese. It's hilarious. I don't actually know how he got this into English. So I'm actually curious going back when I get back to the office to see how it turned out. But if you have a chance, he wants you to go play it, and he says it's his magnum opus of localization. His words.
Oh.
His words. Yep.
Oh, his words. Okay.
No.
I was going to say, next up we have a really interesting title from the Yakuza team over at Studio CS1, Ryuga Gotoku Studios. That's Fist of the North Star, Lost Paradise, coming out October 2nd.
Yes. Yep.
So this is the first licensed property this team has worked on in the Yakuza engine, and there's some real interesting work they've done on it.
So yeah, localization, like Japanese, licensing in Japanese stuff is actually, can be really, really complicated, and I could do a panel about Japanese content licensing in and of itself. It's so complicated. But one of the really interesting things about this particular title is that since this is using the Fist of the North Star IP, there's all these move names that we had to wrestle with, and we don't necessarily get full reign on what we're going to call these. Sometimes they've already been localized in specific ways, but then there's situations where we either can't use the way they, like some examples of...
Well, like for instance, if it takes, even if one of our professional voice actors says the name, it might take them as fast, they go as fast as possible, but it takes like 3.5 seconds, but we have a hard limit of like 2 seconds on the move name and the animation. And at that point, sometimes you have to go back into the licensor and beg for, is there an abbreviated name we can compromise on? Yeah. Or what do you do?
Yeah, and sometimes they're like, no, make it work.
Well, and sometimes the audio engineer is like, all right, I'm going to squish it, and then it... So if you ever hear that in a game, that might be one reason why it sounds...
Yeah, sometimes they're like, well, they can say it that fast in Japanese, why can't you say it that fast in English? And they're like, really kind of like, oh, God, no, you don't get it.
So this is kind of just a spur-of-the-moment thing. Could you actually, since you are a master of Japanese, could you say one of the moves in English and in Japanese just to show the difference?
Yeah, I keep butchering them every time I do it.
Let's see.
Try the bottom.
Shohyakure. Descendant Grace. Like it's like a little bit longer, but if there's an animation that requires him to like hit the guy in the face right on the day point, and that's not lining up in the cutscene, correct? Oh no, what are we gonna do?
Well, this is different for us as well because this has English VO. So whereas Yakuza,
this one has. This is actually the first game since Binary Domain that CS1 has put
Binary
English.
Domain. It's a great game.
Has anyone played Binary Domain? Yeah, you guys are the real winners. You guys are the real one. That's an amazing title. Some other stuff. So a lot of fans noticed that the cover art for North America changed. This is another thing we often have in localization that we have to deal with. So the art on the left, we actually cannot release this as cover art in the West, and the reason being is that there's actually a very small thing that would get flagged by rating agencies that they would just say, sorry, you're like we will not approve your cover for release, which is out of our hands. Can anyone spot what's the problem with the left side?
If anyone gets this, I'll be really impressed.
The issue is that she's got a little bit of side boob showing. And it was basically, it was like, no, you will not be allowed to put this on shelves.
Yeah, that's a hard no.
It's a hard no. So like even if Sega said no, down with the man. There's no we're going to do it anyway. There's no recourse for that. So we
the ratings boards just will not approve it.
They just won't approve it. So we crafted a new thing, but we had such a huge ask from the fan base that like, hey, we really like that original cover art. We do too, of course. And so we were able to kind of work it in as a reversible cover. So if you were able to pick up this game, you can take out the thing, flip it around, and get the original Japanese cover.
What you're basically saying is we cheated the ratings board.
That's how we stick it to the man.
All right.
Unofficial line.
So how do we sell these games, Sarah? How does this work?
Well, thank you, Sam. So we're really lucky that we have such an incredible and passionate community for our Sega games. And as part of our new Sega European office, which is a humble team of 4 people at the moment, myself included, we've been promoting across Europe. We've been to Russia, Germany, Spain, Italy, Poland. I came back from everywhere. And we've had Japanese developers. So we've had Sato-san, who is the series producer. You can see top right, middle, actually in all of them, because he goes everywhere with us. We've had Horitomo-san, who is what's his formal?
So Horitomo-san he's the tattoo artist for the Yakuza series. Really fascinating guy, and his whole story is really interesting. But a lot of people don't realize that he actually he's based in San Jose. So you could literally go to San Jose and have the guy who does the Kiryu tattoos and all that, and have him ink your back.
It's about a 6-month wait, I think.
It's like a 6-month wait, but hey, man, if you're going to get ink like that, is it not worth the 6-month wait?
Yeah. But it's been really cool for us because every territory has different interests. We did Japan Expo recently, and France has a huge fan base of Fist and All Star, so we had panels, presentations. We went to Gamescom recently, and Fist and All Star and Valkyria were dominant at everything we did. So we have to tailor what we do for the territory. For Nagoshi-san, we actually flew out journalists from the UK to interview him, and it's been a long, exciting process. And we got if you read it in Edge magazine, he did a 6-page feature. And it's really exciting for us to get to use Nagoshi-san because his stories, I just sat in the room and went, just tell me a story, this is amazing. But we have him also do a lot of events in Japan, and I know Sam has insight in a stream he did recently that got mistranslated in the West.
Oh yeah. So I don't know if you guys have if you've been following news, you may have heard of this thing where, like Nagoshi-san was on one of the Sega live streams, and he like kind of teased something that they were going to be revealing in the TGS time frame, and I think that the way the media like portrayed it was that it was like they're going to be revealing something completely different. And I was like, what is that about? So I actually went and like watched the stream, and it was interesting because what he was actually saying is that his like MC host girl said something. She said, I don't know what it is, but I have some ideas. And Nagoshi-san, in response to that said, like, unstated, because it's Japanese and you can kind of leave things unstated. He's basically saying, no matter what you're thinking, it's going to be completely different from that. So it's not. So that was like that's like like an example of like why our communication cross regionally is like really important, because ultimately, like, if we don't communicate clearly to the fans, people get confused.
Essentially, me and John waking up in the morning and being like, why is our inbox on fire? Why is every press journalist ever emailing us? And they're going, Sam, help, we don't know what happened.
I don't know what happened either. So yeah, it was kind of, but it's just a really interesting because working in multi languages and all that, it's very easy to kind of for things to get lost in translation, which is part of the localization process. It's trying to make sure that that is not how it works. So we've still got some stuff to do, but we did want to kind of take a break and maybe take some questions from you guys. I'm sure
Yeah,
you
we
guys
have
have
5 minutes, so
We were supposed to have a mic somewhere. Is that it over there? Okay.
and some
Let's
friendly,
figure this out.
some friendly advices. If we haven't announced it, we can't talk about it.
Yeah, that's basically the only
Some hands going
guideline.
down.
If we haven't announced it, we can't talk about it. Sam and Andrew here are masters of localization. They've been doing it for many, many years, so those are the best questions by far.
Yeah.
And if it's where do you get the hat, you can get it at our booth at PAX East, PAX West, by playing Valkyria Chronicles 4.
So we're going to say, what's our stop time again?
We have we stop at 2:30.
Top of 2, okay. So we're going to take maybe 10 minutes of questions.
Yeah, 10 minutes of questions
And
would be
then
good.
we're gonna do
If
something
you're
else.
interested, just queue up, and then feel free to
that's
go ahead and
cute.
ask.
Go for it.
Having just played Yakuza 0, because it just
One sec, we're just going to fix the mic so we
See
can
if
hear you.
it's on. It might just not be volume up yet.
having just
Yell.
I noticed that game is, how do I put this, very Japanese, and it managed to be able to retain that feeling in the translation,
Yeah.
in the subtitles.
Yeah.
Okay, so the question,
What is that process?
So, okay, so the question is that this gentleman has played Yakuza 0 PC recently, and I'm assuming maybe it's your first exposure to the series, and he's noting how well, how Japanese that game is, but it still retains the authenticity in the English translation. So one of the things, there's a lot that goes into that, and there's a lot of thought, but let me give you guys some tips on things to look for. So one of the weird things we do when we work on the subtitles for that game is we take a lot of effort to make sure that where the words are on the subtitles more or less lines up with when you hear it in the audio, and that's actually really hard to do, to keep the meaning, keep the word alignment, and try to link all those things. Sometimes we aren't able to do it, but we actually do spend a lot of time to do that, and to make sure that you feel like you're even if you don't understand the Japanese, you feel like we're doing some smoke and mirrors of no, you do speak Japanese. There's a lot of work that goes into that, and it's just part of the secret sauce. It's part of spending time on it and putting good talent on it and having good people who understand Japanese culture work on this stuff, and bringing all those things together is really part of it.
super quickly before we go on to the next question, I've noticed a few people leave. I would recommend staying till after the Q&A, because we have a little bit of news for you all that you might want to hear.
Yeah, we're getting this out of the way first, though. Yeah. All right, go for it.
Hey, so for Yakuza 6 and for Kiwami 2, I was following Scott on Twitter, and he mentioned that you had a main objective and a subheader that
Yes.
repeated itself.
Yes.
And that he requested to change that to,
Yes.
to have inner monologues. My question, did the Japanese patch that over? Because it sounds like they liked the idea. Have they ever taken an idea you did and put it in their own thing?
So So has any of our ideas for localization ever been onboarded by the dev team? I can't think of any specific instances in my career at SEGA off the top of my head where that happened, but I do have a personal experience from an older game that Scott and I worked on together called Class of Heroes. It's this older PSP title, and we actually in that game had the situation where all these character traits were all indicated by kanji, which you can't understand, and we tried doing text for that, and it didn't work, and I ended up getting a piece of some piece of paper and drawing all these icons on them, and basically PDF scanning, sending it to the dev team and be please make these icons, and they did for the English version, and then for the Japanese version, when the sequel came out in Japan, they actually used the icons instead of that we created for our version in the Japanese version. So.
And you got royalties, right? Because that was your design.
I was young. They took advantage of me.
Always read the contract.
But it definitely happens. But I can't think of a specific situation where the localization text, something in the text has actually ever been onboarded. But we do communicate things regularly with the dev team. And there's a lot of under the hood kind of subtle stuff that does change.
Thank you.
Yep.
So I might have a more like no question, and I apologize in advance if it's kind of in a weird territory, but there's been a game I've been following for a long time that Sega has some association with, and through the localization, this is less of a like translation question and more of like a localization process question, and through the process of localization, it was announced, it was about to come out, and then basically nothing was heard about it ever again until this day. Yep. I was curious if, maybe not specifics, because maybe yes, you know, something could or couldn't be said, but what type of things could possibly happen to stop a game that's basically finished from releasing here?
What could stop a game okay, so what could stop, the question is, what could stop an almost complete game from actually actually being released? There's actually a couple games in the past that have gone through that. And it's always there's like 100 million different reasons why it could happen. It could be licensing issues. It could be cost of production of the product is actually not, now that we're looking at it, the production cost is going to be too big versus what we can expect. Maybe it's decided that like marketing resources need to be focused on somewhere else, and it would literally be a waste of our company's time to actually go through the process of releasing the game and marketing, because marketing is expensive, guys. Like making games is expensive, but marketing is very expensive. Like getting like it seems like really cheap to get those little ads up on like Facebook or like Google or whatever, but that stuff is really expensive.
It's an escalating cost every time.
It gets bigger and bigger, and so actually making games is expensive, but marketing games is equally expensive. So if you get to the end of a production process, and it actually gets time to actually get the game out, and those operational costs or that marketing costs, you could say, well, we could, you know, it cost X number of dollars to make the game, but it's going to cost us X times 1.5 to market it. And we're only expecting this much, maybe we just bank that and move on. Yeah. For example, that's things that happen. That's often why you sometimes see, especially if you recall these like SCNS era, these older games, they're like, it was basically finished to production, but it was never released. Yeah. It's usually something like that. It's like, it just would be too costly to actually release the game, despite it's almost done.
Thank you so much.
I guess I'll just briefly say thanks for the revival of the Yakuza franchise. It seemed like that was dead in the US for like 6 years, so it was a hard time to be a fan. I guess I wanted to have a quick question about Lost Paradise. In Japan, its name is very clearly like just mashing together Fist of the North Star's Japanese title and Yakuza's Japanese title, and I was curious if there was ever a consideration for an English title that was more directly connected to Yakuza, or if you always went in the direction of making it more like this is a Fist of the North Star game that happens to be in the Yakuza.
And I think that actually ties in with the butterfly effect that you were talking about, where a decision that was made 10 years ago suddenly reverberates.
Right. So Lost Paradise has like literally nothing to do with Yakuza, like as a theme. Now we could. There was, and of course, like it's not like we, you know, internally we were like, oh, we never had thought about that. That's a great idea. Now, of course, it was discussed extensively, but I think one of the important things about this, and we talk about we've been knocking out these like Yakuza games like one after another for the past like 2 years. We've given you guys these Yakuza games. And I think ultimately for Lost Paradise, you know, it is a, you know, the Yakuza fans know what that game is. Like, if you're a Yakuza fan, you look at that and you're like, I know what this is. But if it's someone who's not familiar with Yakuza or just has heard Yakuza in passing, you know, it may be like, oh God, another one of these damn Yakuza games. And so, like, and I'm not saying that that's a reason, but I mean, it's just like, you know, I'm like kind of putting that for everyone's consideration, is that, you know, the title of a name, the way we brand things, the way the pack front looks, the messaging, all that stuff is stuff that we literally have teams of people thinking all day about, and it's complicated, and there's a lot of factors that are all kind of coming in together, and we, you know, decisions are made, and we move forward with certain ideas in place, and this is the North Star.
I think it was certainly discussed a lot. I think I had at least 10 conference calls a week to go back and forth. But for us, to Fist of North Star, we love this game. We love what the studio have created, and we want more people, like a much more mainstream audience, to pick up on the title. So thinking about the title, you're thinking if I walk past in GameStop or in game, what type of name is going to grab out to me. It's a really important consideration is, yeah, like Sam said, if I'm a Yakuza fan, I know this game, I know RGG Studio, but if I'm not a Yakuza fan, what is going to really appeal to me? And it also ties into why covers can be different region to region as well.
Yep. I mean, so it comes down to it. We really wanted Fist of the North Star brand to like kind of stand on its own for this one and give it the breathing space, and that's what we did.
Thank you.
You have time for one more, John? Oh, we lost it. Just checking.
Yeah, we can do a couple more.
Yep. Okay.
Hi.
Enlighten me on this.
Oh, sorry. I'm a fan since 3, essentially. And I know in the span of time between then and now, like Atlas got acquired, and they played a more elaborate role in the translation of Yakuza games and stuff like that. I'm just curious what, since 3, it may be too big a question, but what has changed in your process? And, like in between iterations, what kind of lessons have you
That's
gotten?
a big question.
That's a great question. Okay, so this is very closely tied to sort of the evolution of SEGA of America as a company as well, because we're talking about 2004, 2005 SEGA of America, which was based in San Francisco, and 2018 SEGA of America, which is based in Orange County, is like they're just like completely different organizations. The people are different, the staff is different. It's a rebirth, in a different place. I would say that for the original game, we should really start there, is that game was positioned to be a sort of GTA. It was positioning. We were talking about positioning just previously. We were talking about the name of Fist North Star and who do you want to look at your game? Who do you want to pay attention and pick up eyes? And that original Yakuza game, we wanted people who were interested in open world crime-based stuff. And so at that time, that's GTA, that sort of thematically. And so we said, in order to get those people, we're going to have to, let's double down on the Yakuza theme. Let's make sure it has English VO. And when you, like I said earlier, when you add English VO, that makes your localization a certain style, because that's a style, okay? Now, that game went out. Things happened, there were results, and when they decided to do the second one, they said, okay, we're going to back away from the English stuff because it's expensive to do that, and we're just going to let it go out in Japanese because that was a possibility. At the time, that wasn't really I want to say that there were some regulations about like having Japanese VO in North America.
Around the time of the first game, and then by the time the second one,
they started being more lax on that. So we released the second game in Japanese, and that was kind of that's like a big culture shift. So you're gonna like gain some people, but you're gonna lose some people, so it was disruptive. 3 was new platform. It was coming off that sort of disruption, so now we have 3 and a lot of kind of complicated stuff that I would love to talk about, but I just can't. A lot of stuff happened on that, and then we went into 4, and 4 happened, and there was but that one's got, like, Cosmic Kido's not even really the main protagonist, so it's like kind of a hard game to like get into if you're not already kind of bought in. So you're on this rocky road and you're not really into Strime, and then that went out and it's kind of meandering kind of sales, not really hitting expectations so much. 5 comes along, it's 2.3 million JPCs of text, and it's going to take a long time, and expectations are somewhat low, and the fans, and it's complicated. But now, what happened in Yakuza 0, once we moved away from the San Francisco office and we were able to partner with Atlas, who's literally tuned towards this kind of product. They have processes in place to do this. This is their bread and butter. And we started integrating with Atlas at Yakuza 0, and that was the game changer. And so we all of a sudden were able to do things in time periods and in scales that we were not previously able to do. Starting with Yakuza 0, and then with Kiwami 1, which we, like I said, we literally translated from scratch with our Atlas staff. Then we came out with 6, and now we're at Kiwami 2, and it's basically found new soil where this property can really like flourish with people who understand what the content is, and you guys are obviously enjoying it. So keep doing
was
it.
that just like raw manpower, basically?
It's not really. It's more than that. That's why it's complicated. It's not just manpower.
I think even like Kiwami was published by Koch Media in the UK and Europe, and because we didn't have our European team, since we've changed, we now have a European team, we can publish as Sega Europe, which means we have access to a lot more resources and teams to help, from things down to localizing trailers to doing events. It just means our reach has expanded much further.
Video games are much more complicated than just making the game. It's a full spectrum of all these different functions that have to come together in a perfect synchronicity to make something really pop. And if any one or two of these kind of fails or doesn't really click, the whole thing gets lopsided and it just doesn't execute right. And that's why games cost millions and millions of dollars to make, and it takes lots of time to get it done.
Yeah. Anyways, there's nothing like them out there. So thanks for, making it happen.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
So I would say we have probably like 4 minutes left.
Yeah, let's do one.
If we lightning round, we may be able to get more people, or we can do super detailed.
Okay, quick one. Quick one relating to licensing. One of the big things from Yakuza 0 and the first Kiwami was the different opening music. In this case, you couldn't use the bubble and Receive You remix. How many hoops does it take to jump through to go, oh, we can't use this music, how we do something similar?
Yep. So licensing music, Scott and I actually talk a lot about this on our streams. If you guys ever, again, just to plug them, please go back and watch all the Yakuza streams. I think they're fascinating personally, but music licensing is very complicated, and there's some simple things that can literally just, that's a deal breaker and it's just not going to work. Ultimately, we're looking at the health of the product and what's best for the market, and we do recognize that a lot of people want that parity, and it just sometimes just doesn't work out.
All right, thank you, and fingers crossed that the OSTs do wind up making a way to Amazon Music and iTunes.
I hear you.
Hey, if you could say something to, say, the people who translated Valkyria Chronicles 3 fan translation, what would you say?
I would say, more power to you guys.
Yeah, I mean...
That was me.
Good job.
Hey!
How do I top that? Well, first off, thank you. And I have a question about Yakuza 0. How did you go about getting that little Kuribo reference in there? The screw the rules, I have money. How did that get
Which one is it again?
Screw the rules, I have money. The creator of Yu-Gi-Oh! The Abridged series, Little Kuribo, plays the Yakuza 0. And that's how I even got into this series, because he's like, oh yeah, they referenced my series in this game.
Oh, I'd have to go back. That's a small detail that I would have to talk to Scott about. I don't know.
I actually can give a little bit of insight. We have a lot of really memey people on the localization team, and they will try their best to fit in as many memes as possible while keeping true to the Japanese localization. Right. We don't want to affect the actual feel of the game. But we actually had one of our translators on Twitter was playing this sub-story from Kiwami 2, and he said there's 3 people trying to recruit Kiryu, and he's saying they could have asked to be their 4th chairman. But so that's the kind of thought process that goes through these guys' heads.
He's basically saying, I could have worked this in, but I missed the opportunity, and now I'm going to kick myself in the ass for it. So.
Yeah, they had 3 chairs. They wanted him to sit in the 4th one. They're like, be our 4th chairman. It's these guys are nuts.
Yeah,
so
that's why they're on staff. So let's wrap up Q&A, and we'll move on to the next thing, which is.
Yeah, Sam's very responsive on Twitter. If you have any questions,
you can always ask me questions on Twitter. But so here we go. First one is this guy. So we're going to be releasing the demo for Fist of North Star, Lost Paradise on September 4th. So go out and get it. Go out and get it.
3 days from now.
That is what's that like? That's like Tuesday, right?
It's Tuesday, yeah.
This is Tuesday, so that's like 3 days from now. So you guys can get that onto your PS4 and play it. And if you have any questions, just at Sega and let us know, all right? And then the next one is this guy right here. So that's like 2 or so weeks after the launch of VC4. So if you Switch users out there, which I know there's a lot of, so yeah,
Another
let's do that.
special treat. I don't know if I can even say this right now, but I'm going to go ahead and do it. If you purchase Valkyria Chronicles 4 digitally on the Nintendo eShop, can I say this? Okay, I can say this.
Here we go. You got a nod.
Then you'll get.
You got the nod from the market, from the brand manager.
Yeah, so you'll get a 25% discount on Valkyria Chronicles, the original one, on October 16th. Once that launches, if you bought VC4 digitally, get that discount automatically.
Yeah.
So
that's in US and EU as well.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay, and with our last minutes here, I'd like to invite everyone to stand up. We're going to do something special.